So what we're going to take a look at now is loading our related data. Now, our attendees are related to our activity, of course, and we want to tell Entity Framework that we're interested in getting these as well as our activity. Now, there's a few different ways of doing this. So I'm just going to come to the loading related entities documentation from Entity Framework, and the three different ways are eagerly loading. And this is a process where a query for one type of entity also loads the related entities as part of the query. And what we do is we specify that we want to include a related entity along with the other entity that we're returning. And this is the one that we'll look at initially. There's another way of doing this, and that's lazy loading. And this is the process where an entity or collection of entities is automatically loaded from the database the first time that a property referring to the entities is accessed. Now, in the previous version of the course, lazy loading was a brand new feature that was added to, I think it was .NET 2.2. And to borrow a line from Jurassic Park, I was so preoccupied with whether or not I could use this, I didn't stop to think if I should. And lazy loading is convenient for the developer, but it's not the most efficient way of querying our database because this is something that you turn on or you turn off at a very high level in your application. And if you turn it on, then everything's going to be lazy loaded, even for things where you don't require the related entities. So in this version of the course, we are not going to touch lazy loading. And there is a third way as well called explicit loading, where we can call the load method on the related entities entry. And there's an example here, but I've never really found a use for using explicit loading. But there is another approach that we'll take a look at soon, which is using projection, which also allows us to get our related entities directly. But in the first example, we're going to take a look at eagerly loading our entities. So back to VS Code, and what we need to do here is we need to go back to, well, let's go to our activities list, our list handler. And what we're doing right now is we're getting our activities to a list and returning them. But what we'll do is we'll add a line above this and we'll say var activities equals, and then we'll go and get our activities. I'll just cut this code and paste it in here. But in addition to the toList, or before we execute the toList, then we're going to specify an include statement, and we're going to say that we want to go and get our attendees. Now the attendees is just our join table, remember, and our attendees are related to our app user. So what we also want to do in here is go and get our users. And to do that, we can use len include, which is going to get the related entity to our attendees, and we'll just say u goes to u.appUser. And then we can just say we're going to return the activities here. Now, if we go and test this right now as it is, we're going to see an error. And let's take a look. So we're going to query our get activities once again. We'll click on send, and it tells us that a possible object cycle was detected. And if we take a look at the reason for this, what are we actually trying to do here? Well, we're trying to return a list of our activities that includes our attendees and then includes our app user. But what does our app user contain? Our app user entity, if we go and take a look at the app user, well, this contains a collection of activity attendees as activities. So we're also going to return this. And then this returns, or our activity attendee class. If we go and take a look at this, this also contains an app user. And our app user contains activity attendees, which contains app users, which contains, and so on and so forth. And we end up with an error like this. It's not going to allow us to try and return data that's going to be infinite in its nature. It's just going to throw an error. So what we can do, we can configure our application to ignore this particular error, which we're not going to do. And what we're going to do is shape our data instead, so that we are not attempting to return an object an activity object that contains an activity attendee, which contains an app user, which contains an activity attendee. So we're going to look at shaping our data we're going to return, and we're going to look at that next.